How do we find that least common denominator, or we refer to that as the LCD? Well, let's go back to that least common multiple, the LCM. Believe it or not, the LCM and the LCD are really the same thing. It's just that a multiple is a number, where if it's a denominator, it needs to be at the bottom of a fraction. So let's go back to that least common multiple. What is the least common multiple of 12 and 18? Well, first of all, we have to know what a multiple is. A multiple means like 12 times 1, 12 times 2, 12 times 3, 12 times 4, and so forth. Those are multiples of 12. So if we have multiples of 18, we have 18 times 1, 18 times 2, and so forth. Now the reason why I'm stopping is because they both have 36, and since I got to that number first, that's the first common multiple, then that would be the least common multiple, is 36. So let's see. Over here, what's the least common multiple of 9? 9 times 2 is 18, times 3 is 27. We could keep going. 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3, and yes, 18 is the answer. And you probably just knew that because you've done it before. But that seems like a tedious way of getting there. There is a different way to find that least common multiple or that least common denominator. Let's just look at the factors of these numbers. Okay, if I factor 12 into that prime factors, 12 is 2 times 2 times 3, right? 4 times 3. 18 is 3 times 3 times 2, 9 times 2. So their least common multiple, they have to have the common multiples. Well, they have 2 2's, they have and 2 3's. 4 times 9 is 36. Does that work over here? So 9 is 3 times 3, and 6 is 3 times 2. That's called prime factorization. So their least common multiple, I would take the 2 3's and the 2, which is 18. Think about that. What did I do? I factored it, and I took the most of each factor. So there was 1 2 here and 2 2's here, and I took 2 2's. There was 1 3, 2 3's, and I took 2 3's. And that was my least common multiple. That's exactly how we're going to find that least common denominator. The reason why we need the least common denominator is because when you add or subtract fractions that have different denominators, you have to find that LCD before you can add or subtract. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor each denominator, or if you just know their least common multiple, you're going to write it down. But if you don't, you're going to write down one of every kind of factor, raise each factor to its highest power. That's the least common denominator. Now we're not going to add or subtract here. We're just finding that LCD. The adding or subtracting comes in another lesson. So do you know the least common multiple between 24 and 36? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But let's see if we can factor 24. You might want to use factor trees. You might think of that as 3 times 8 or 4 times 6. That's kind of what I think about. But those are not primes. I can break down 4 and I can break down 6. That's as far as it goes. So 24 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. What about 36? Well, I think about 6 as 6 times 6. You might think about it as 4 times 9, 3 times 12. Lots of different choices. We're all going to end up in the same spot as long as we get down to those smallest numbers called primes. So 36, if I kind of put the 2's together and I put the 3's together. So let's look. Here's 24, here's 36. Their least common multiple, which would be the least common denominator, is they have, let's see, it says write down one of every kind of factor. So I have 2's and 3's. So I know I have a 2 and a 3. Raise each factor to its highest power. Well, this would be 3 of them. This would be 2 of them, so the highest power would be to the third power. I have 3 of them. And then my 3's, that's 3 to the first, that's 3 to the second, so I need a 2 there. Now let's multiply that out. That's 8 times 9, which is 72. And again, if you knew their least common multiple, you were done. Now let's talk about some letters. Variables. You can't really find a least common multiple of variable as easily like you could numbers. Just a little bit different. But we can proceed. So first of all, let's look at those numbers. Do you know the least common multiple of 6 and 4? Think about it. Did you come up with just 12? 12 should have been their least common multiple, but if you didn't, remember 6 is 2 times 3, 4 is 2 times 2. So again, I'm going to call it the least common denominator since I am in the denominator of a fraction. I would need 2 2's because that would be to the highest power, and I would need a 3. And that is 12. But that's just the numbers. Okay? We also have to do the letters. So let's go back down here. Write down one of every kind of factor. Do you see x's and y's? So I need x and a y. I'm going to go ahead and put the 12 because I've already got that with the number of 6 times 4. Not 6 times 4, but 6 and 4. Write down one of every kind of factor, raise it to its highest power. So the highest power on x, well, 4 is bigger than 3. And on y, I have 2 and 5. And of course, 5 is the biggest. That would be the least common denominator. Let's try some more. Okay, here, let's look at the numbers. Do you know the least common multiple between 8 and 16? You should know it's just 16, because 8 times 2 is 16. So I know I have 16, and then what's the only other factor I have? X, and it's to the first power. I'm done. So you have to look at that as 8 times x. Those are not glued together. So you look at the 8 and the 16. What is that least common multiple? And then the only other factor you have is x. What about the next one? Okay, so we look at the numbers. What's their least common multiple? Well, they don't have any common factors, right? So their least common multiple is just multiplied all that together, which is 20, right? 4 times 5 is 20. Again, they don't have any common factors, so you would have to take them all. And then, what is the only other factor you've got? X to the highest power. This is to the first power. That's to the second power. That's your least common denominator. Ooh, these look a little bit harder. So if you go back to those notes, you're going to factor each denominator. Can we factor this? No. Can you factor the next one? No. Those are just factors. So it says for the least common denominator, write down one of each kind of factor raised to the highest power. And those are both to the first power. That's it. Yes, that is it. We're not going to do the adding and subtracting. We're just looking at that LCD, that least common denominator. Number 6. Can you factor that? No. This, I want you to think of that is 4 times x, right? So my least common denominator, write down one of every kind of factor. So I have a 3x minus 2, I have a 4, and I have an x. That would be your LCD, but it's probably a little bit prettier if we put that monomial in front. Yep, that's it. That's all we're doing right now. So let's do that last one. We have to factor. Can you factor this? I hope so. That's a trinomial. So let's see, our leading coefficient is 1, so we say what multiplies to get 20 adds to get 9. 4 and 5. Okay, what about this one? Come over here. Again, leading coefficient is 1, so I have x times x. What multiplies to get negative 4, but adds to get positive 3. Positive 4 and negative 1. Now what's my LCD? It says write down one of each kind of factor. So I have to have one of those, one of those. Now what about that? Ooh, that's the same, so I don't need to write it down again. Then I need an x minus 1. And then it says write down one of every kind of factor, raise it to the highest power. There's a 1, there's a 1, there's a 1, there's a 1. So those are all to the first power. And that is your least common denominator. In subsequent lessons, we'll be doing more with those least common denominators.